How's it going, everyone? I'm Nick, and you're listening to the Fresh Perspective Podcast. These days, the average parent tends to feel unfairly judged, like they're constantly under a microscope. This is understandable, given how much more we know now, psychologically speaking, about the significance and impact of a person's early childhood. But how much of that early childhood is actually influenced by parents, and how much of it is determined by genetics, friends, and other factors completely outside a parent's control? Are we being too hard on parents? And what does it even mean to be a responsible parent in the first place? Sage, Sam, Cristina, Charlotte, Dallas, and others join me in this episode to discuss this sensitive topic. Ironically, several children and other distracting noises were in the background as we held our online meeting. I've done what I could to edit most of that out, but I wanted to let you know that listening to this episode will be a bit more turbulent than usual. Nevertheless, I'm sure you'll agree that the honesty, experience, and advice shared about raising children is well worth the listen. This program is brought to you by your local Free Thought Forum. Our members come together from various belief systems and backgrounds to share their perspectives, hear new ideas, develop positive friendships, volunteer, and learn more about science, philosophy, and life skills. Every meeting is a celebration of free speech, civil discussion, and the free exchange of ideas. We want to ensure that as many people as possible have the opportunity to speak their mind and have their ideas contested and reviewed among peers in an inclusive and supportive community. So, we are now authorizing the creation of new chapters around the world. If you would like to start a new chapter in your community, find official events near you, participate in our online meetings, or support our programs with a donation, please visit freethoughtforum.org for more information. Sage, could you start us off with the title and the introduction question?
Sure. Free Thought Forum, discussion primer, responsible parenting. Supporting children on their unique paths through life. Healthy habits and life skills. Introduction. What is a parenting choice that you admire? And why?
Let's see. So I did hear a story once by Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. She's like, you get criticized either way. She was a Hollywood parent. Her husband and herself have been working full time, even through having children, right? They've never stopped. They've been working full time for 20 years. So her parenting choice was, instead of sending her kids to a school, she homeschooled her kids and she took her kids wherever she went around the world on set. Either she or Will Smith. And she talked about like the media always playing it like they were bad parents, or you have no roots, or your kids are just bouncing around with tutors and that's why they're weird and eccentric and this and that. And then she said, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It mattered to me more to have my kids close to me and building our relationship than have, nannies care for my kids while I was working. So I really admired that. And I thought she made a good choice, and it's a difficult choice, right? And I'm sure traveling and working with children at the hip is not easy.
It's brilliant. Yeah, and in that, what would she do different, right? Like leave them home with the nanny so they can go to school,
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And she said that she did not want that. She wanted her kids to know that she's the mom, basically. Like she wanted to have a relationship with the kids.
Yeah.
When I was taking my first early childhood development class, this was at Salt Lake Community College, the professor had an entire day where she talked just about conflict management, where she talked about just how to deal with kids who are being stubborn and things like that. And she gave me this idea, which would profoundly influence my teaching approach and things like that. She talked about how her kid was very stubborn. The kid did not want to walk to the car when it was time to go to school. So she would give him options. This is very much in line with the love and logic approach. I don't know if you guys have heard of love and logic, but this is what she was the champion of.
I have neither of those.
Oh. But she basically told the kid, she gave the kid an option. She said, well, you can walk to the car on your feet, or you could hold my hand, or I can carry you. Which way would you like to go to the car? basically this sense of choice allowed them to relax enough to make a choice. And they would stubbornly shout, "On my feet," and then they would walk, like it's something that having this idea about giving a kid multiple options, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that was one of the first times where I thought, wow, that's brilliant. And it's hard to think of it off the top of our heads, but we do encounter every once in a while just brilliant parenting choices. But here's the tricky part. It's usually a parent who's really on their game. What they're doing isn't detectable. It's all behind the scenes. And so, yeah, that's probably why it's tricky to think of it right off the bat.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on what you said, it's important that you control the choices that the kid has options for. You keep it limited to 2 or 3 different choices so the kid feels empowered on some level, but you're not overwhelming with so many choices. And you're making sure that they're all safe choices and appropriate choices that they have to choose from.
I can read the next part. Conflicting information. Parenting is a sensitive topic. Conflicting advice is abundant. Many of us are overly critical of our parents, and as parents, we often feel unfairly judged. Some are overly confident, while others are convinced that they will never be worthy of the task. Responsible parenting can be one of the most difficult, fulfilling, and human things a person can do in a lifetime. A responsible parent is one who ensures that the needs of their child are reasonably met so that the child has the tools they need to adapt, survive, and thrive as an independent adult. In today's discussion, we'll consider these needs in categories of physical, mental, emotional, social, and character development. Sam, could you go on to the next part for us?
Yeah, I've got you covered. Every child is unique. A common myth in our society is that if a parent is diligent and flawlessly adheres to a strict list of do's and don'ts, then they can produce a perfect child who will be accepted into an Ivy League university and live an ideal life. Of course, as developmental psychologists have found, and most parents can confirm, such an approach is unrealistic. And then the question we have is, what is the harm in trying to control every aspect of a child's day-to-day life?
Well, I think as far as their development mentally, emotionally, and physically, it's important to let them kind of make their own mistakes and develop their own conclusions with regard to things. So controlling every aspect, I think, limits that in a lot of ways so that they can't arrive at their own conclusions of life. They're just based with, like the textbook you throw at them or whatever.
Yeah, we've seen an interesting development in our society where kids in late high school and early secondary education and higher education are extremely proficient students. They can write articles and they can write blog posts all day long. They could share their opinions. They can argue for a cause, but they can't do their own laundry. They can't pay bills. They can't handle a situation in which they're surrounded by new people with different opinions. It's a very strange phenomenon. And, of course, I'm not the only one to comment on it. My theory is that that's attached to this idea that we are trying to treat our kids as if they're little sculptures, that if we just, carve them and create them and form them just right, then they can be like these paragons of learning, and they could be very successful, and they can blow us away. But we're forgetting that there's a bit of humanity in every person. There's a unique set of opinions there. There's a unique personality there. And when we ignore that, when we try to suppress that, that does a number of untold damages to that little personality that's under development. I very much appreciated the support of parents who came in and say, well, okay, you're the teacher. We'll go with, your approach to the situation. Contrast that with other parents who'd come in and they would want to control everything, not just their student, but the entire classroom, the entire curriculum, and so on. Yeah, it makes it an extremely hard environment for anyone to thrive, especially their child.
That's a pretty stark contrast, right? And I think some parents just believe so strongly in themselves that they want to create a miniature duplicate, I guess.
Yeah. When it comes to parenting, it really isn't about you. It's not about creating a child that you can brag about. It's not about that sticker on the back of your car. That's not the point. You're helping a new person develop into a full person. And yeah, there's some weight to that. And we're always better off to remember that. Let's see. Cristina, could you read the rest of that section, please?
Yes. While biological, adoptive, or foster parents have a significant and often unpredictable influence on their children, they may have little real control over who that child will become. The majority of the evidence suggests that other factors also have profound influence, such as a child's genetics, the media they consume, friends, teachers, and the consequences of their beliefs and choices. To further complicate the issue, every child has a unique set of needs. The same parenting style, after all, may yield dramatically different results between siblings. So rather than trying to control a child so that they become some vision of perfection, it is far more reasonable to be sensitive to a particular child's unique needs and modify one's parenting style accordingly. As a child, how were you different from your siblings or peers despite having similar genetics and upbringing? I don't think that I'm a good person to ask this because I was very different. But I think the other factors played in. Factors such as the age difference. My older brother's 11 years older than me, and my sister's 8 years older than me. I think that makes a difference, the gap in ages. And I don't think my mom had a specific parenting style, and for sure not a healthy one. So
I'd like to add just what you brought up there, Cristina. It's true. You can have a particular parent who has this one approach, but that approach will vary, even though they're trying to be as even-handed as possible. It will vary from child to child. We treat our first kids a little bit different than we treat the rest of our kids. We treat our youngest different, despite our best efforts. Several psychologists will be able to, based on your mannerisms, tell where you are in the birth order of your family. Second children, fourth children, fifth children, we all act in a certain very predictable way. And I get tickled with that. I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think parents will automatically, whether intentional or not, they'll have a favorite child. If the kids pick up on that, it'll modify their behavior. It'll impact their behavior for sure.
Yeah. It's hard to feel loved if someone else is loved just a little bit more,
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Kind of on that same topic, though. Like, I've got 5 kids, and I know that I am not the same person that I was 14 years ago. Myself, you know what I mean? So yeah, my baby gets raised a lot different than my 14-year-old.
Yeah, and this is, let's just get real here for a minute. This is one of the most complicated things we've ever tried to understand as a species. Is there any phenomenon more complex than the human brain? And we're talking about the development of a new and completely unique human brain every single time we're raising a kid. It's impossible to know everything you need to know before raising your first child. I think we can all very scientifically soundly give a lot of room and have a lot of patience for parents, modifying their techniques after each child they have. Because how else can we expect them to function, really?
Well, it's often the case that the firstborn gets babied and coddled, but then by the second or third kid, the parents, they know that nothing bad's going to happen. So they kind of, neglect is too strong of a word, but it's along those lines where they're a little bit more careless with the other kids, the younger kids.
And, Charlotte brought up a tiny bit of tangent that we could spend a lot of time on, and I'm happy to do so if you guys want to, but it is important to say that some family dynamics are straight up pathological. There are a few family dynamics that are very unhealthy, where you have things like abuse and neglect, and these are really real phenomenons. So as we talk about maybe going easy on parents, or as we talk about how challenging it is to raise a kid, there are things that we can do that can be very damaging. And so I don't mean to darken the atmosphere too much, but that is a real reality, and it is a real element of our society that we need to take seriously. Now, a lot of people in my generation, we're just not having kids. And I think part of that is because we know the very real trauma and the very real damage we can do if we're being careless. And whether or not that apprehension is warranted, I guess, depends on you and your worldview and your politics and things like that. Perhaps it can be said that we're taking these things a little too seriously and we all stop having kids, I mean, this is definitely a double-edged sword, you can be too careful, I guess is one way to put it. Let's see, Charlotte, would you be okay with reading the next part?
Yeah, I've got it pulled up. Give me a second here.
Sure, no problem. We're at the section that says physical development. And we've gone over time the last few meetings. Sage, could you please keep an eye on the clock for us and help us stay on task tonight?
All right.
Physical development. When possible, birth via birth canal, natural breastfeeding, and exposure to a normal amount of germs at an early age all can boost a child's immune system. Every child should also be vaccinated as recommended by their pediatrician. Plenty of rough and tumble play, time outdoors, and rigorous physical activities are also essential in the formation of an appropriate level of confidence in their physicality. A child's eating habits also have lifelong consequences, so help them gain a love of vegetables, plain drinking water, and a varied nutritional diet. All good choices. When children are being picky eaters or are otherwise being stubborn, it can help to give them a set of options that each work for you, where there is no wrong answer. For example, you can ask, would you like the broccoli, snap peas, or carrots with dinner? Or do you want to play a video game before we go for a walk or after? How can we keep kids physically safe without being overbearing?
That kind of brought up the thing we talked about a little earlier, though. If you give an option like that, it gives them the illusion of choice, right? And so you give them two perfectly reasonable options, they feel like they have control, because a lot of times kids are just being obstinate because they want to explore, like they just want to see if they can make you mad a lot of times. And so if you give them two equally fine choices, it just kind of breaks down those barriers.
Absolutely.
I like how you put it, Dallas, because a lot of life is testing barriers, testing the limits. We really want to know what the confines of the universe around us, what they really are. For example, Nintendo just re-released Mario 64. You can now play it on the Switch. And one fun thing to do is to just run around that 3D environment and try to find the gaps in the code. Try to do things like wall clipping and falling through the fake walls and finding where there's mistakes in the program. It's a lot of fun to do that. And it's a natural human instinct. It's just like a bunch of cows who are trying to find the weak part of the fence. This is a very fundamental and natural thing that we do. And when children do that, that often comes off as them testing your limits, pushing your buttons, trying to see where they can get away with things. Even though it's so easy to say, we can't take that personally. We need to remember over and over and over that they're just trying to see what their limits are. They're just trying to see where the boundaries are in their life. Because before we can really do anything, we have to understand our boundaries.
Once you understand your boundaries, I think you feel more empowered over your environment. That feeling of empowerment, whether it's an illusion or not, I think it builds. It keeps kids from acting out in the future as they get older. They feel more in control of their environment and of their lives.
On Neil deGrasse Tyson has this little clip that goes around once in a while about how kids are really just scientists. Like they just want to try things and see what happens. You know what I mean? And so I try to remember that when they cut up pieces of paper or carpet or clothes and scatter them all over the house. It's like, well, like we can't do that because now you don't have, whatever it is. And yeah, they really are just trying to figure out why and what and how. That's about the most of it.
Yeah, I mean, how brutish does it look like when kids are smashing toys together? But contrast that with some of the most brilliant minds on the planet right now. What are they doing? Well, at like the Large Hadron Collider, they're literally smashing particles into each other just to see what parts fall out. And we discover things like antions and gravitons, and like we discover new particles of matter by doing essentially the same process that your toddler is doing in their head. So yeah, we are little scientists. I love that. I'm glad you brought that up. And speaking of which, that's a great transition into mental development. But actually, before we jump there, are there any more comments about that question? How can we keep kids physically safe without being overbearing? Because that is a really tricky question. Most parents I know obsess a little too much over keeping their kids safe. But how can I qualify that? What does it mean to be too protective? For some parents, that there's no line there. You can never be too safe, you know?
Like what
I
heights
think
are
I
they
am a
allowed to
little bit.
fall from, you know? Kitchen counter might be too high. Off the couch, man, that's okay. It's especially hard right now with COVID and stuff because we're not really going outside and getting exercise or playing outdoors.
Cristina, you were talking about something about protecting kids, right?
Yeah. So I say that if you start early, well, obviously kids, you can't reason with like a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. Like you have to be a little bit more kind of on top of them because they can do something that they don't realize just yet that is safe, or that's not safe rather. So what you can do is as they're growing, you have this sense of constantly keeping safety in the conversation in a way that's matter of fact. And it's literally by repetition. And it gets exhausting, I know. You can't play with the scissors. The scissors can really hurt you. And you take the scissors away. They might throw a tantrum, they might not. And then, 6 months later, they were there. Remember, scissors can, you can hurt yourself. Let's take that away. And it just kind of that way. For some people, that may be overbearing. But again, we're talking about people with different framework, different values, and different upbringings. So that's very subjective. I don't know where that line is, but I do know that in my experience, that has been it, that you have that constant matter of fact kind of repetition until it sticks in their long-term memory. Then you'll see that by the time they're 5, 6, and 7, they'll say, oh, my mom says you can't be running around with scissors because you can really get hurt. Like it already has been there because that has been the consistency since they can remember.
Yeah, that's true.
I like that. And especially like it kind of goes back to like instilling healthy levels of fear. If they're at the playground and they're going to fall from 2 feet, that's an opportunity. Or if they're going to fall from 20 feet, that's a real danger.
Yeah. It's odd because we all agree on these two ideas. And children should be allowed to be little scientists. If they want to pull apart the flower in the garden, let them do that. They're discovering, they're learning. And so much of life is trial and error. Despite our best efforts, even the best parents fail at stopping their kids, from having to learn some things through trial and error. But then we get into this very scary place about, well, there are some extremely dangerous things where we can't let them learn it that way. We can't have people learn, that they'll break their leg or whatever if they jump off the roof. Like there's a limit. And so we agree on both of these things. Kids should be allowed to make mistakes, but then there's some mistakes that kids should never be allowed to make. And so, yeah, welcome to parenting, everybody. Like it's a total paradox.
I think there's something to be said for giving your kids some alone time as well. I know that nowadays there's just unbroken chain of custody from childcare to home with no space in between for a kid to explore their world by themselves or with their own peers. I don't know.
There's like this whole phenomenon with these little fidget things, right? Kids just have to sit and fidget with something. And I think there's value in just being bored.
Sure, absolutely.
Hear.
I agree. I'm going to challenge.
Stole lids from freaking Denny's so that they could play with them. And I'm like, no, we're not playing with garbage.
I want to challenge a little bit what Charlotte said. So I and a lot of people in their 30s, right, come from a generation where we were latchkey kids. We would spend sometimes the entire day not seeing any other person.
Yeah.
So once we started having kids, it's been like, oh no, I know what it is to be freaking 8 hours by myself because my mom had to work or whatever. My parents had to work and we had to figure out our own dinner because they wouldn't come home till, 8, 9 o'clock, or I have to put myself to bed or what have you. So I think that the pendulum has swung the other direction, and there may be that extreme on that side. Either extremes are not healthy, right? So not to call one more healthy than the other.
Absolutely. And Charlotte and Cristina, you both of course, your comments bring us back to this idea that even though one kid may thrive as a latchkey kid or as a free range kid, and they'll be able to entertain themselves and they'll be able to make friends with neighbors, another kid may be completely compromised by that sort of arrangement, and they would need a lot more structure, whereas another kid would find more structure stifling. So it's a moving target. And, it's whenever you hear someone say, oh, I have the one and true formula for raising kids, you could tell them to just get out of here with that because, every kid is a different person and we have to really respect that.
They really are too. Like with my 5 kids, my older 2, they really don't care for you being in their business all that much. You know what I mean? Like they're more of the left to kind of do their own thing. And where especially my baby, he will not leave your side. He's kind of, I guess he's just a 2-year-old. That's the easiest description.
I mean, there's another element too. There's trying to do what's best for kids. And then there's also the limits of human capabilities. For example, say your kid needs a lot of direct attention and you work 2 jobs and you're exhausted when you get home. What then? And so we could talk about parenting styles and approaches all day, but where the rubber meets the road is, where we have to ask a lot out of parents. And sometimes they don't have a lot to give. So again, not to sound like a total hippie, but we really do need to be a little bit more easy on parents, guys. That's my other soapbox tonight.
Good point.
So let's go ahead and jump into that next section then, mental development. Who would like to read that for us?
I guess I can do it then.
Awesome. Thanks, Sage.
Mental development. A child's brain is like a sponge, eager to soak up knowledge. Read and talk with your child about anything and everything. Even as newborns, this has a tremendously positive impact on their brain development. As they age, learning can feel either like a chore or a delight. When you share your love of learning new things with your children and ask them about and celebrate their ideas and discoveries, their natural curiosity will grow, making school a more enjoyable experience. At the earliest opportunity, you can also do much to strengthen your child's critical thinking skills. Before giving them an answer, ask them to think through the issue out loud. Ask them to give reasons for why they believe something, challenge their assumptions about causes and effects, point out logical flaws in a non-judgmental way. As they age, they will have a more realistic level of confidence in their reasoning skills. What is a fact that brought you joy when you first learned it?
So the Perseverance team has to shift their work hours 40 minutes later every day. I just learned that. That's right.
Well, wait, I'm a little confused by that. When did you learn that? What do you mean?
On Facebook, I clicked it. So because of the Mars time shifting, they have to shift their work hours 40 minutes later every day.
Oh, nice. Oh my gosh. Wait, isn't the landing of their next rover, gosh, isn't that like in a couple weeks or something?
I think it
No, they just did it.
Yeah, they did it.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah.
You sure did. It was great.
Yeah, they're keeping up pretty much on track with these things. Even slowed by COVID, they're still getting it done.
So here's something that was an absolute delight when I learned it. The origin of the moon. One prevailing theory is that a small protoplanet named Theia ran into the proto-Earth something like 5 billion years ago, something like that. And basically it broke up a bunch of the Earth in a bunch of pieces, and those pieces coalesced into a set of rings. So our planet used to have a set of rings like Saturn, and those rings clumped together into what we now have as the moon. The moon is made of mostly light elements. The evidence points to this being a true thing, and so every time I look at the moon, I keep thinking it's like a piece of us, that hasn't quite drifted away, and it's just something that made me smile when I learned it.
Well, give it time. The moon is slowly getting away.
Yeah, it's getting away.
Matter of inches every year, but it's getting there.
And also, not to get too personal, I remember learning about evolution for the first time, that it was actually a robust theory that has several forms of evidence that support it. I was under the impression that it was a lot of bogus. It was just a lot of hot air my whole life. And to learn that it's a real thing, and that dinosaurs and trilobites and all sorts of bizarre.
Wait. So Adam and Eve are not real?
But I'm sure there are some forms of Christianity that work just fine with evolution. you know. But yeah, when I learned that for the first time, it was so life-changing. It was emotional, but it was a moment of joy. And it really helped me see a world in a completely different way. I learned that I was also wrong about so many things in life, but again, that was a sweet feeling to learn that I was super wrong, you know? So here we are.
Very cool.
So, Nick, how old were you when you first learned about the truth of evolution?
Oh, something like 21. That was pretty late in life. But yeah, you don't forget learning something like that for the first time. That sticks with you.
If the sun suddenly blew up, it would take us 8 minutes and 20 seconds to see the light.
I love that. I love that so much. One of my science club kids asked me that. Oh gosh, this was back in like 2014, I think it was. But yeah, a kid asked me, how many light years away is the sun? And then I said, oh, it's not any light years away. It's 8 light minutes, yeah. And the sun, or the moon is about 1 light second away, right?
Give or take.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's Google.
Let's see. Sam, could you please read for us the next section?
Yes. Is it emotional development?
Yes, sir.
Emotional development. Love your child through your mood and actions. Show your love for your child. They impress you and when they disappoint you. Help them learn how to express, manage, and regulate their complicated and intense feelings by listening, acknowledging their feelings, and asking them questions. Teaching by example. Children learn primarily by imitating what they see. When you are optimistic, loving, confident in yourself, kind, and emotionally healthy, they will naturally strive to emulate that mindset. How can we continue to love a child when it's difficult to do so?
Well, shouldn't this love be unconditional in the first place? I mean, just because you're not happy with a person doesn't mean you don't love them. Sometimes even going to the effort of disciplining or trying to deal with their unpleasant moods, moments, and everybody has those, can be a sign of that affection, of that love that is deeper than any of the momentary changes in response to the particular individual.
Dallas, you had an answer for us?
I just said practice.
Oh, it's a learned skill. Would you guys agree?
You feel an attachment to your kids, I think, at least speaking as a mother biologically, right? But loving is a skill, right? So by doing it is how you learn and you strengthen that capability within yourself. When it comes to children, remembering that loving this child when how many times my kids have like smeared yogurt on the floor or broken so many things, remember, look, I'm choosing to love you, so I love you. And like kind of that reminder, that habit that you form, it not only works with your kids, it works with everybody, right? You have more compassion towards humanity. You have more compassion towards, your stomping neighbor upstairs. You have more compassion towards, your horrible boss.
Yeah, definitely an action. It's not always a feeling. As long as you act out love, that's what matters.
I read this book a few months back called The Whole Brain Child, and in there they talk a lot about this method of like connecting with the children and then redirecting the behavior or whatever. And I think that's a pretty good way to show love, because the first thing you're doing is you're trying to figure out why they're doing that. You know what I mean? And connecting with them emotionally. Whatever it is, whatever kind of crazy shit they've just done, which is sometimes pretty radical, right? Like it's mind blowing what they'll find to do. But the first thing, like, is connecting with them emotionally, and then trying to figure out why they did that, and then redirecting that behavior towards what you would rather them do.
Yeah, I really like the way you're all putting it. Compassion is something that I've been studying on the side, especially, in our conversations about Taoism and our conversations about stress reduction and things like that. Compassion is a fascinating topic for me. And I think I agree 100% with what Cristina and Charlotte, what you were talking about, Dallas. But I like the way you put it, Dallas, about rechanneling. When I was a kindergarten teacher, this was the analogy that I kept in my mind, because kids, especially when you have 35 or so, kids in a room, they act like a flood, a rushing deluge of water. And you can't just stand in front of them and just stop it like a brick wall. That's not how it works. Rather, when you see them starting to act in a certain way, all you could do is really channel it. All you can do is really redirect that surge, of energy and that attention. And so, yeah, whenever people talk about parenting in a way of like redirecting, things, I can totally connect with that.
Rule of thumb that I sort of adopted is I try to regard children as adults and try to regard adults as children. And by that, take what they say seriously, get down to their eye level. Don't try to do baby talk. Talk to them as if they're little adults. And on the other side, the flip side, when you're dealing with adults, if you just see them, if some adult is annoying you or ticking you off, and you just view them as the person was a child once, whatever happened in their life, them the way they are now is not necessarily their fault. So the idea of regarding children as adults and adults as children, I think it helps you relate to both in a more appropriate way or beneficial way.
Yeah, I like that so much, Charlotte, and that really matches my personal philosophy as well. I was thinking about, in our conversation before, about how some parents really are impressive. Some parents really do things that we see them and say, oh my gosh, they got this figured out. But I'm tempted to call a lot of that something like a post hoc rationalization. We do that all the time. We look at parents and say, oh my gosh, they got their act together. Wow, they should make a course or something. They should write a book. But how much of that is they just got lucky? They just have a kid who's a very well-mannered little person. Yeah, it's really hard to tell. We tend to think that we understand cause and effect super well. And I think any study in reasoning and logic will prove otherwise. Let's see. Who would like to read the next part on social development?
I will. Social development. Parents should share their values with their kids. They should also help them gain a deep and non-judgmental understanding of local social norms. Give your child opportunities to play several different games with several different people. Help them meet many new people and maintain friends at every stage in life. Be accessible and supportive as they giggle through their first crush, cry through their first heartbreak, and gain the courage to date again. When is it easy to make friends?
I guess my answer to the question is when the stakes are really low, when there's not a ton of pressure to make friends. When I think of some of the best friendships I've made them in extremely casual settings where making a friend was just a natural consequence of just being friendly and enjoying people's company and getting to know people.
I think I agree, Nick. Like the pressure makes it more intimidating, and then it's more like forced.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's look at the opposite. It really sucks when you're assigned a partner in a project like in college. Oh man, like that's a total nightmare. Let's lower the temperature a little bit. Let's dial down the stakes, and I think we'd all get along a little bit better.
That's a good point.
Sage, could you please read for us character development?
Character, yes.
Which accent?
Oh, I don't know. I think there was a request for the Southern earlier.
You do impressions?
So let's see here. Character development. When you or your child make mistakes, be honest about them and optimistic about the future. Be consistent, predictable, and dependable. And at the earliest opportunity, teach children how to perform household chores. Set clear expectations and then hold them accountable without lowering your standards. Always assume ignorance before assuming ill will, and praise good behavior when you see it. Tell them if they do something you don't like and logically explain your position. Rely on natural consequences far more than artificial punishments, and never do for them what they can do for themselves. Why is some disagreement and conflict between parents and children considered healthy?
So that kind of goes back to last week's to always assume ignorance before like ill will. I think it's natural for people to try and do what they think is right.
Yeah.
Rather than the ill will.
And let me add to that. This is one of the first lessons I learned in my first psychology class. And man, it rings true with all of my experience. We think we can read people's minds. We think we know what people are thinking, but we're wrong 99.999% of the time. We can't read people's minds, and we really should stop trying to. The part that you brought up, Dallas, has really saved my life, so many times as a teacher. Kids will blame each other for everything under the sun, right? They lose a pencil, the first thing they shout, "Somebody stole my pencil." There's assuming ill will is a knee-jerk reaction that's very natural, it's very human. And when you're a teacher and when you're a parent and when you're a counselor or however you interact with kids, it's such an important skill to develop. All you have to do is say, okay, well, we don't know that. We don't know that there was any meanness. We don't know that there was any greed. There was no moral failing involved. In fact, most of the time there really isn't. Just like what you were saying, Dallas. Yeah, most of the time people are acting in a way that makes sense, at least to them. They're acting in a way that they're not trying to antagonize other people. And when they are, it's usually extremely obvious. And so, but even in those cases where it seems obvious, we need to say, okay, well, for the sake of being fair and for the sake of being compassionate, for the sake of giving this kid a little room to grow, let's go ahead and just assume that they didn't remember the rules, that they didn't hear the expectations clearly. Let's give it to them again. And then let's ask them if they have any questions, make sure that they get it, and then just move on. And every time that I thought that I was bending over backwards, treating a kid a little too nicely when they were really being just a rotten little person, every time it paid off. The kid appreciated me taking that approach, and we got into a better place because of it. Near the end of my teaching career, I just stopped ever thinking that ill will was involved because it was never useful to assume that.
Well, there you go.
Huh.
We went over real quick, rely on natural consequences. What does that mean to you guys, relying on natural consequences when you're teaching kids?
Like natural consequence of gravity, or running too fast, or spilling your milk and now you have to clean it up, or
Or taking candy from strangers, the simple stuff. Totally kidding.
I think the goal of parenting is just to get them to that age without taking on still hitting and fighting and stuff, right?
Yeah.
The toddler, he hits. The 10-year-old, I hope not.
So I hope, Nick, you don't cut what Charlotte said. And Charlotte, you win tonight's meeting.
What did Charlotte say?
Yeah. Yes. Yep, got it. Yeah. So another important point I want to tag on to that question is this idea that some conflict it's not just unavoidable, it's actually a really good part of becoming an individual person. Right now, Sam and I are studying several books on reason and logic, and one of the books I'm reading is the book from Stephen Hassan about cult mind control and things like that. And it's a very heavy topic, and it's a very interesting read. But one theme that keeps coming up is that when you're in a cult or when you're in a controlling environment, whether it be a political cult or a business type of cult, when you're in that controlling environment, you lose your identity. You lose your sense of individual worth. You lose your sense of reliance on your own decision making, on your own sense of reality. And it's very interesting as I've poured time into researching this topic, that same theme kept coming up, but in reverse. A good parent doesn't control the identity and the thoughts of their child. They nurture and they guide their child so that they can form their own identity. So let's think about that logically. When a child is born, they're completely dependent on you. They are 100% reliant on you. And if you're lucky, also on your partner, But the thing is, when they turn 18 or 19 or 22 or whenever they're an adult and whenever they move out, they're going to be completely independent, 0% dependence on you. How do you go from 100% to 0% without some bumps along the way? How do you make that transition without a few arguments, without a few disagreements, without a few heated conversations? And the answer is you don't. They're just a natural part of that process.
I don't think it ever gets down to 0%. I mean, there's always, even if at the very least, financial connections where they're asking for money.
Well, a pleasant consequence of the disagreements, too, is you get the opportunity to show your kids how to resolve conflicts without resorting to yelling or fighting or, those sort of things. It's where you get to be an example, I guess.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I'm really glad. Charlotte, you're exactly right. I'm glad you brought that up. Dallas as well, because you think that your fights with your kid when they're a teenager, for example, when most of us are very stubborn and when we like to fight, you think those arguments are the last ones they're ever going to have? If you don't show a kid how to resolve a conflict, how are they going to handle their first argument with their, girlfriend or their boyfriend in the future? How are they going to handle dealing with their own kids who won't stop crying, in the middle of the night? Yeah, being able to handle that intense situation. This is a very human and very important life skill. Maybe the most important. I don't know, but it's up there.
It's probably not limited to just how you interact with your child, but they're obviously observing how you're reacting with your spouse or your significant other, because you're doing a lot of modeling for the correct way to have a discussion or an argument with your significant other, and then the kid will pick up probably subconsciously different skill sets from that.
Yeah, we can see this on the cellular level. We all have something called mirror neurons, basically special parts of our brain that read the expression on the faces of our parents, of our caregivers when we're infants. And later in life, we don't only just match their emotional state, but we also, that those parts of the brain develop on, so that we can actually copy their behavior and how they approach things. I find mirror neurons extremely interesting because you can hook up a baby to like a heart rate monitor and have their mother just sit next to them and smile at them. And this is something that is creepy, how reliable it is. When their mother is soothing and smiling, their heart rate goes down, they relax, they smile too. And then when a mother has a frozen, stern expression or a look of disgust, the baby's heart rate will increase. It'll stress them out. Here's the takeaway for me. This isn't just what happens between babies and their mothers. This is something that also happens between all of us all the time. And when you have a bad attitude or when you respond to something, when you overreact, that kind of positivity or negativity, it really does influence other people. We're hardwired to be social like that.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, let me say about half of us are parents, about half of us have never been parents. And I am so relieved that we haven't constantly disagreed with one another this whole time. So kudos. Very happy about that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and read that last section. It takes a village. Charlotte, could you read that for us, please?
Yes. No parent is perfect, nor should they feel ashamed about asking for help from family, friends, trusted fellow free thinkers with shopping, babysitting, cooking, homework, and more.
If you have enjoyed this conversation or have learned something from it, please leave a like, subscribe, and share it with other open-minded people. All of those small things really do make a big difference and help others find our organization and our podcast. Thank you. That is all I have for you today, but the conversation continues across social media and in the comment sections below. Do you agree with today's message? Am I mistaken about some detail? What feedback or ideas do you have for this program or for the Free Thought Forum? Feel free to share your perspective.